There are places in this world that seem to exist slightly outside the normal flow of things. Not foreign countries or distant continents, places right here, within the borders of what you think you know, in states with names you learned in school, on roads that appear on every map, places where the trees grow too close together and the hills fold into each other in ways that make the sky feel smaller than it should. Places where the history did not go the way the textbook suggested it would, where the people who stayed did so because something about the land held them in ways they could not always explain. West Virginia is one of those places. The only state in the continental United States entirely within the Appalachian Mountain system, a state born from a war, shaped by an industry that took everything it could and left the hills riddled with holes and haunted not metaphorically, not conveniently, but in ways that have been documented, investigated, and never fully explained by something that appeared in the sky over the Ohio River on a November night in 1966 and changed the way an entire town understood the world. Today we go there, into the mountains, into the dark. We start with the geography, because in West Virginia, the geography is everything. West Virginia is the most mountainous state east of the Mississippi River. It has no flat land to speak of. The entire state is hills and ridges and hollows carved over hundreds of millions of years by the same tectonic forces that built the Appalachian Mountains, which are among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth. The Appalachians were once as tall as the Himalayas. They have been eroding for 300 million years. What remains are rounded, ancient ridges, worn down by time into something softer than a young mountain range, but no less imposing when you are inside them. West Virginia sits in one of the most geologically complex parts of the Appalachians, where the rock layers have been folded and faulted into patterns so intricate that early surveyors gave up trying to map them with any precision. The state has 35 named mountain ridges, hundreds of unnamed ones, and a topography so complicated that it was the primary reason West Virginia was able to separate from Virginia. In 1863, the mountains had already separated the people. The communities in the western Appalachian ridges had almost nothing in common economically or culturally with the plantation society of the Virginia Piedmont, and when Virginia seceded from the Union at the start of the Civil War, the western counties voted to secede from Virginia. West Virginia became a state in the middle of a war, born from a secession, the only state in American history created by breaking away from another state during a conflict. And from the beginning, it was defined by its terrain folded, resistant, and impossible to move through quickly. A place that kept its own counsel. Beneath those mountains lies the reason that the 20th century treated West Virginia the way it did: coal. The geological process that created the Appalachian Mountains also trapped vast deposits of organic material in the rock layers, material that compressed over hundreds of millions of years into one of the richest coal seams ever discovered on the North American continent. The coal measures of West Virginia contain coal of a quality and quantity that shaped American industrialization. The steel mills of Pittsburgh ran on West Virginia coal. The railroads that connected the continent burned it. The cities that lit up in the early 20th century were powered by it. At the peak of coal production in West Virginia, in the mid-20th century, the state was producing more coal than any other state in the country. Entire towns existed solely because of coal. Entire communities were owned by coal companies. The houses, the stores, the churches, the schools, all company property. The workers paid in scrip that could only be spent at the company store, unable to save money in any form that would allow them to leave. The term company town was not a metaphor in West Virginia. It was a legal and economic reality that kept generations of families in a condition that fell somewhere between employment and captivity. And when the coal ran out, or when it became cheaper to extract it with machines rather than men, the companies left. They left the towns, they left the hills full of holes, they left the rivers polluted with acid mine drainage that turned the water orange, and they left a population with no economic alternative and a landscape that would take centuries to heal, if it heals at all. There are over 90,000 abandoned mine openings in West Virginia. 90,000. Some of them are sealed, many of them are not. They open into the hillsides like the mouths of something that ate the mountain from the inside and is now simply waiting. And it is inside those mountains, in those old mine workings, that one of West Virginia's strangest and least discussed phenomena occurs. The Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia are riddled not only with coal mines, but with natural cave systems of extraordinary extent. The state has over 4,000 documented caves, and the true number, including passages that have never been entered by a human being, is unknown. Organ Cave in Greenbrier County is one of the largest cave systems in the eastern United States, with over 40 miles of mapped passage and sections so large that a Confederate army once stored saltpeter for gunpowder production inside it. There are cave systems in West Virginia that are still being mapped, passages being discovered for the first time in the 21st century that connect to systems miles away, underground rivers that surface briefly in valley floors before disappearing back into the rock. Cavers who explore these systems describe a particular quality of the silence underground in West Virginia, not the clean silence of a sealed room, but a living silence, full of dripping water, and the distant sound of movement that always seems to come from just beyond wherever the light reaches. Several experienced cavers have reported, independently and without knowledge of each other's accounts, a phenomenon they describe as the feeling of being watched from the dark, not the ordinary claustrophobic anxiety of being underground, but something more specific, more directional, as if whatever is in the dark ahead of you is actively attending to your presence. No scientific explanation has been proposed for this phenomenon. It may be nothing, but cavers who have spent time in the deep systems of West Virginia speak of it with a consistency that is difficult to dismiss entirely. Now we need to talk about the forests. West Virginia is 79% forested, the third most forested state in the United States. And its forests are not the managed second growth woodlands of New England. They are old. The Monongahela National Forest alone covers nearly 920,000 acres of the Central Appalachians, containing some of the oldest and most biologically diverse temperate forest in the world. The Appalachian forests of West Virginia are part of one of the largest contiguous hardwood forest systems remaining in North America, home to species of trees, plants, fungi, and insects that exist nowhere else on Earth. But what defines the West Virginia forest as a physical experience is not its biodiversity, it is its density and its topology. The hills are steep enough that the tree canopy closes over you within minutes of leaving any road. And the canopy itself is so complete that on an overcast day, the light inside the forest drops to levels where human vision begins to fail at distances of more than 30 feet. People get lost in the West Virginia forest with a frequency that would be alarming if it were better publicized. The terrain, ridge after hollow after ridge, with no visible landmarks, no reliable cell signal, and no easy way to establish cardinal direction without instruments, disorients, even experienced outdoors, people within hours. Search and rescue operations in West Virginia's forests are among the most difficult in the eastern United States because the terrain makes both ground search and aerial surveillance enormously complicated. There are hollows in the West Virginia mountains that are accessible only on foot, that have no roads within miles, and that local residents have not entered within living memory. What lives in those hollows, what has always lived there, undisturbed, is a question that the forest declines to answer directly. And within that forest tradition, within the oral history of the people who have lived in these mountains for generations, there are accounts of things that do not belong to the cataloged fauna of the Appalachians. The indigenous Shawnee and Cherokee peoples who inhabited this region before European settlement had their own names for presences in the mountains entities that were not animals and not humans, that moved through the forest in ways that animals do not move, that were encountered at dusk and at night at the boundaries of firelight. The Shawnee in particular had a sophisticated taxonomy of non-human beings associated with specific geographic features, river crossings, cave entrances, ridge lines. The edges of clearings and the warnings associated with these locations were specific and consistent across generations. European settlers in the 18th and early 19th centuries, moving into the West Virginia hollows, brought their own traditions of forest entities and merged them over time with what they found already present in the land. The result is a body of Appalachian folklore so layered and so internally consistent across communities that have no documented contact with each other that researchers who study it tend to conclude that the traditions are not borrowing from each other, but describing something shared. Something that different people in different centuries, in different parts of the same mountains, encountered and described in ways that rhyme. But the most famous encounter in West Virginia's history, the one that made the state internationally known for reasons its Chamber of Commerce has mixed feelings about, occurred not in the deep forest, but in an abandoned TNT plant near the small city of Point Pleasant on the western border of the state where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers meet. On the night of the 15th of November, 1966, two young couples driving near the plant encountered something on the road that they could not explain and could not forget for the rest of their lives. They described it as large, significantly larger than a man with wings folded against a body that was dark in color and with eyes. The eyes were the detail every witness returned to. Bright, red, reflective, set in a face or head that did not correspond to any bird or animal they had ever seen. Eyes that caught the headlights and held them. Eyes that seemed to be looking at the witnesses with an attention that was not animal. The thing rose into the air as they fled, chasing their car at speeds they estimated at over 100 miles per hour, following them to the edge of Point Pleasant before disappearing. They went to the police. The sheriff investigated. They were not considered to be fabricating their account. And within days, dozens of other residents of Point Pleasant and the surrounding Ohio River Valley came forward with accounts of their own, something large and winged seen at night, something that moved in ways birds do not move. Something with those eyes, always those eyes. A reporter covering the story gave it a name that stuck, the Mothman. Between November 1966 and December 1967, over 100 separate sightings were reported in the Point Pleasant area. Some witnesses reported accompanying phenomena, interference with electrical equipment, strange phone calls with static and mechanical voices, visits from men in black suits and sunglasses who asked questions about what they had seen and seemed to know things they should not have known. The sightings ended on the 15th of December, 1967. The Silver Bridge, which spanned the Ohio River at Point Pleasant and was the main crossing point for the community, collapsed during rush hour traffic, killing 46 people. It was one of the worst infrastructure disasters in American history. And the Mothman, whatever it was, wherever it came from, was never seen in Point Pleasant again. There are people who argue that the Mothman was a misidentified sandhill crane, a large bird with a wingspan that can reach 7 feet and eyes that reflect red in certain light conditions. Sandhill cranes do migrate through the Ohio Valley in November. This explanation satisfies some people. It does not explain the speed, it does not explain the behavior. It does not explain why over 100 separate witnesses, many of them with no knowledge of each other's accounts, describe the same configuration of details in the same sequence over the course of 13 months. And it does not explain what happened to whatever they saw after the bridge came down. Now, let us go underground in a different sense. 30 miles from the small city of White Sulphur Springs, beneath the Greenbrier Resort, one of the most historically significant luxury hotels in the United States. A place where American presidents have vacationed since the early 19th century, there is a bunker, not a modest emergency shelter. A full-scale, fully equipped, continuously maintained government installation built in complete secrecy between 1958 and 1961, designed to house the entire United States Congress in the event of a nuclear war. The Greenbrier Bunker, officially known as Project Greek Island, contains 153,000 square feet of living and working space carved into the hillside beneath the resort's West Virginia wing. It has dormitories for 1,100 people, a fully equipped hospital, a decontamination facility, a power plant capable of operating independently for extended periods, a broadcast studio from which the government could address the nation after a nuclear exchange, and enough food and supplies to sustain the American legislature for 60 days. The bunker was built and maintained in secret for 30 years its existence known only to a small number of government officials and Greenbrier Resort employees who signed non-disclosure agreements and maintained the cover story, which was that the West Virginia wing of the resort was being renovated on a rolling basis. The secret held for 3 decades. It was finally exposed by a Washington Post reporter named Ted Gupp in 1992, who published a detailed account of the facility's existence and purpose. Within weeks of the publication, the government decommissioned the bunker. It had been prepared for 30 years for a nuclear war that, once exposed, it could no longer serve its function in. The bunker is now open for tours. You can walk the dormitories, see the broadcast studio, stand in the decontamination chamber. But the fact that it was there, that beneath one of the most elegant hotels in America, a facility for the continuation of government after civilization ended, was maintained in secret for 3 decades, that the staff who prepared the rooms and served the dinners upstairs knew what was beneath them and said nothing. That fact sits in West Virginia's history like the mine openings in its hillsides. A hole that goes deeper than you expect, into a darkness that the surface gives no indication of. West Virginia has another secret that is less dramatic than a congressional bunker, but in some ways more revealing of what the 20th century did to this place. The opioid crisis hit West Virginia earlier, harder, and more completely than almost any other state in the country. Between 2006 and 2016, drug distributors shipped 780 million opioid pills to West Virginia, a state with a population of under 2 million people. That is approximately 433 pills for every man, woman, and child in the state, delivered over 10 years by pharmaceutical companies that knew the quantities they were shipping were far beyond any legitimate medical need and shipped them anyway. The counties hardest hit were the same counties where coal had been mined most intensively, places where the economy had collapsed, where chronic physical pain from mining injuries was common, and where the medical infrastructure to manage pain treatment responsibly had never been adequately developed. Mingo County, in the southern coal fields, received enough opioid pills during this period that if every single resident had taken their share, they would have consumed more than a pill per day for a decade. The death rate from drug overdose in West Virginia became the highest in the United States. It has remained the highest in the United States. The pharmaceutical companies involved have paid billions of dollars in settlements. The people who made those decisions have largely not gone to prison. And the communities in the West Virginia hollows where those pills arrived continue to live with consequences that no settlement has addressed. Let us return to something older and stranger. The New River, which runs through the southern part of West Virginia before joining the Kanawha River, is one of the oldest rivers in the world. Despite its name, the New River is estimated to be between 3 and 65 million years old, making it one of the few rivers on the North American continent that predates the mountains it flows through. When the Appalachian Mountains were uplifted, the New River was already there, and it simply kept cutting downward as the mountains rose around it, maintaining its course through processes of erosion that kept pace with the uplift. The result is a river gorge, the New River Gorge, that is over 1,000 feet deep in places, cutting through rock layers that tell 300 million years of geological history in their walls. The New River Gorge was designated a national park in 2020, the newest national park in the United States. But what the designation does not capture is the quality of the gorge as a physical and psychological space. Standing at the rim, looking down 1,000 feet to the river below, with the forest coming all the way to the edge on both sides, and the bridge, the New River Gorge Bridge, the longest single arch bridge in the Western Hemisphere, spanning the gap in a single leap of steel, is one of the most vertiginous geographic experiences available in the eastern United States. And in the gorge itself, where the river cuts through rock that is older than the dinosaurs, there is a quality of time that resembles what people describe in other places in this video. The sense that the present is thin here, that the rock around you contains so much accumulated time that the century you were born in feels provisional, like a layer of paint over something much more permanent beneath. There is a town in West Virginia called Centralia is in Pennsylvania. But West Virginia has its own version of a community destroyed by what lies beneath it, and in some ways it is more complete. The town of Colwood in McDowell County, is where the aerospace engineer Homer Hickam grew up, and where he built his first rockets in the 1950s. A story later told in the memoir Rocket Boys and the film October Sky. But Coalwood is also a perfect example of what happened to every coal town in West Virginia when the company left. The Olga No, one coal mine that gave Coalwood its reason for existing, closed in 1986. The company, Olga Coal Company, a subsidiary of U.S. Steel, left. The houses, the company store, most of the structures of the town were demolished or collapsed over the following decades. Today, Coalwood has fewer than 200 residents. The church still stands. The post office still operates 3 days a week. The road that leads into town passes through hills that are returning to forest as the hollows gradually reclaim what the coal industry briefly interrupted. There are thousands of Coalwoods in West Virginia communities that were real, that had schools and churches and baseball teams and people who were born and grew old there, that exist now only in the memories of the people who left and in the slowly disappearing evidence of what was built before the coal ran out. Now we come to something that West Virginia has in greater concentration than perhaps any other state, and that is the specific experience of American isolation. The state has the lowest population density east of the Mississippi, fewer than 75 people per square mile. In a landscape where those people are distributed across hollows and ridges in such a way that it is entirely possible to drive for an hour in certain parts of the state without passing another vehicle. This isolation has produced a culture of self-reliance and insularity that is frequently caricatured by outsiders and rarely understood by them. West Virginia's people have survived the extraction of their natural resources by outside interests, the collapse of the industry that those resources supported, a public health catastrophe engineered by pharmaceutical companies, some of the highest rates of poverty and lowest rates of educational attainment in the country, and a political invisibility that makes it possible for a state to be simultaneously essential to American energy history and almost entirely absent from American cultural conversation. And through all of this, the culture that has persisted in the West Virginia mountains, the music, the foodways, the storytelling traditions, the particular quality of dark humor that develops in communities that have been told repeatedly that their problems are their own fault, is one of the most distinctive and most genuinely American cultures that exists anywhere in this country. The Scots, Irish, and English settlers who moved into the Appalachian Hollows in the 18th century brought with them musical traditions that merged over generations with African American musical influences brought by enslaved people. In the Virginia Piedmont, and what emerged the banjo and fiddle tradition of Appalachian old-time music. The early commercial country music recorded in Bristol in 1927, the bluegrass that Bill Monroe would develop from these roots is the foundation of American popular music in ways that the popular music industry has rarely been willing to acknowledge. Let us go back to the paranormal, because West Virginia is not done with it. The state has a documented tradition of what folklorists call Appalachian high strangeness, a cluster of phenomena that resist any single explanatory framework and that have been reported consistently across communities, generations. The Flatwoods Monster is one of them. On the 12th of September 1952, in the small community of Flatwoods in Braxton County, a group of children and their mother encountered something in a field near a bright object they had seen descend from the sky. What they described, a 10-foot-tall entity with a dark body, a spade-shaped head, and eyes that glowed with a greenish light, surrounded by a mist that smelled of sulfur and caused nausea and burning of the eyes and throat, was investigated by a local reporter and documented in photographs of the physical traces left at the site. Several witnesses experienced physical symptoms consistent with exposure to an irritant gas for days afterward. The official explanation, a barn owl perched in a tree, magnified by fog and hysteria, fails to account for the physical symptoms. The contemporaneous documentation, or the fact that the witnesses included adults who were not predisposed to hysteria and who maintained their accounts unchanged for the rest of their lives. The Flatwoods Monster, like the Mothman, exists in the category of things that West Virginia produces that the outside world cannot quite file away. And there is one more thing about West Virginia that deserves to be said plainly, because it sits beneath all of the strangeness and the darkness and the beauty of this place and gives them context. West Virginia is a state that has been looked at from the outside and misunderstood from the outside almost continuously since it was created. It has been called backwards and poor and forgotten. And while all three of those descriptions have at various times been statistically accurate, none of them account for what the mountains actually produced. They produce people who know what it means for the ground beneath them to hold secrets, who know what it means for an industry to arrive with promises and leave with everything that mattered, who know what it means to live in a landscape that is simultaneously beautiful and dangerous and deeply, pervasively old in ways that the human nervous system registers, even when the conscious mind cannot name what it is registering. The Mothman appeared and the bridge fell and the town grieved and rebuilt, and it is still there, on the Ohio River, with a statue of a winged figure in the town square and a museum on Main Street, because the people of Point Pleasant decided that what happened to them was worth remembering even if nobody outside the mountains quite believed them. That is West Virginia. That has always been West Virginia. A place that knows things the rest of the country isn't ready to hear. Waiting in the mountains with the patience of 300 million year old rock, and saying what it has to say in the only language it has ever used, the language of what actually happened, told in the dark, to people who are paying close enough attention to listen.